Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight in South Africa, glimmers of economic growth see the central bank cut rates for the first time in 4 years, even as the government considers how to absorb the impact of around 400 million euros worth of electricity bills still unpaid by some districts. Also, NGOs say that French energy giant TotalEnergies' controversial East African oil project is already having devastating effects on wildlife in northern Uganda. And the fight goes on. After decades at the forefront of research that saved or improved countless lives, a South African power couple is awarded the Nobel Prize of Science, the prestigious Laska Award. But the husband and wife team say that they're honoured and still inspired to keep forging ahead. But first, cautious optimism for the continent's top economy as South Africa's central bank cuts its rates for the first time in more than 4 years on Thursday. Lending rates have been lowered from 8.25% to 8%, a day after inflation dropped to just below 4.5%, which is a far cry from the 5.9% average of last year. Now, the economic outlook is expected to improve in the last 2 quarters of this year, in part because of the suspension of rolling power blackouts that have been estimated to cost South Africa tens of millions of dollars a day in the past. But the ailing power company Eskom has, despite making some progress in reducing load shedding, on Thursday been the subject of government debates about whether to write off about 400 million euros worth of unpaid bills. Tom Kinetti tells us more.
Now, Eskom is owed about 4 billion euros from about half of the municipalities across South Africa who have not been paying for their electricity. This comes at a time where load shedding, the process of rolling blackouts across areas in South Africa where electricity demand is higher than supply, hasn't occurred in the country since March. That's thanks to the reopening of 2 coal plants and a nuclear facility. But the government admits that recovering some of this money from these municipalities is going to be almost impossible in some cases. So they've been debating the idea of fronting the bill of some of this debt for the municipalities to Eskom. The Minister for Energy and Electricity has said that at this rate, Eskom, if the problem is not addressed immediately, Eskom will be owed about 75 billion euros by 2050. That would cause the national electricity provider to shut down operations and halt electricity provision to the entire country. So for many South Africans, the idea of going back to load shedding would be extremely frustrating. This can mean residents without electricity for hours at a time, meaning the recovery of this debt is all the more important.
Tom Kinetti there for us. Now, on Wednesday, the UN Security Council highlighted the worsening of the crisis in the Sudanese Darfuri city of El Fasher, where hundreds of thousands of civilians are trapped as the conflict escalates. Since the war between the army and the paramilitary RSF force broke out last April, tens of thousands of people have been killed across Sudan, and the spectre of famine has deepened the humanitarian crises triggered by the conflict. 2 decades after Darfur suffered through genocide and war crimes at the hands of the Janjaweed Arab militia, who are the forerunners of the RSF, and El Fasher is once again the site of horrific violence. Our regional correspondent brings us more.
This isn't the first time that the UN Security Council has called on both sides to end the fighting in El Fasher. But despite these numerous calls, the intense shelling and airstrikes continue. The UN Assistant Secretary General for Africa, Martha Poby, has warned that both sides, the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces, have been violating humanitarian and human rights international law. These violations include assassinations, the detentions, and the torture of civilians.
As the violence escalates in El Fasher and continues to spread across the Sudan, the risk of atrocities multiply, including egregious violence against women. Both the SAF and RSF and their respective allied groups and militias continue to show complete disregard for international human rights and humanitarian law.
Now, the RSF reportedly launched a coordinated attack on El Fashir from multiple directions, and the army, which is positioned inside the city, responded, and that response lasted days. In the last few months, the civilians in Al Fashir and 700,000 people who've been displaced from other parts of Sudan have been under siege inside the city with little or no access to humanitarian aid. Both sides have been accused of blocking humanitarian aid from entering the city, and in recent weeks that situation has been made even more complicated because of the heavy rains and flooding. But that humanitarian aid is very much needed. In refugee camps just outside El Fashir, hundreds of thousands of people have been declared in a situation of famine, and children are dying every hour.
Livia Bizo there for us in Nairobi. Well, NGOs say that French energy giant TotalEnergies' controversial East African oil project in Northern Uganda is already having devastating effects on biodiversity. Conservationists say that drilling near the Murchison Falls Nature Park, the largest of its kind in the country, is upending the fragile ecosystem. Shamadi Roma brings us more.
Elephants, antelopes and other animals in Murchison Falls National Park are already feeling the impact of the initial oil drilling, according to a study conducted by a Ugandan NGO. A year ago, TotalEnergies and a Chinese company launched the first drills in northern Uganda as part of a major oil extraction project led by local authorities. However, this new report, based on several months of research, indicates that these drills are already affecting the wildlife. Elephants, particularly sensitive to vibrations, are increasingly leaving the park, leading to conflicts with surrounding communities, resulting in the destruction of crops and the death of several people following elephant encounters, according to the report. The lighting from the installations is also criticized, as NGOs fear it will disrupt lions and leopards, which can only hunt in complete darkness. The construction of several roads through the park also worries environmental activists. TotalEnergies responded by clarifying that it is not responsible for these roads. The company also disputes the claims about elephant movements, stating that it closely monitors them with its partners and that the lighting has been adjusted to minimize disruptions, amongst other measures.
Now, after decades of pioneering and life-saving work in infectious diseases, South African epidemiologists Karashi and Salim Abdul Karim have won the prestigious Laska Award for Public Service, a top recognition for medical research. Clarice Fortuné tells us more about them.
They are known to be the power couple in the South African public health sector. Karaisha and Salim Abdul Karim have saved thousands of lives through decades of fighting the spread of infectious diseases. Getting the Laska Award for Public Service is a top recognition for medical research.
So I think it's both humbling and inspiring. Humbling because you don't think about us from Africa getting this sort of pinnacle, what's described as the Nobel Prize for Science in the US. But inspiring, on the other hand, in how science, which was my initial dream, science can change the world, and the transformative power of science being recognized from Africa.
The couple's focus on HIV followed their move to the United States in 1987. The virus was then ravaging New York.
To us, when we came back to South Africa at the end of 1988, it seemed like this was going to be the next big challenge.
But they were met by governments in denial about the scale of HIV/AIDS. Its poor response is estimated to have cost 2.5 million lives between 1999 and 2010. South Africa became the epicenter of the pandemic. The couple has been recognized on their work on an antiretroviral treatment that reduced the spread of the virus by 39%. They also launched research labs and trained hundreds of scientists across Africa. New infections in South Africa have dropped to 150,000 in 2023 from a peak of around 520,000 20 years ago.
And finally, El Mojin is a sweet hazelnut spread made in Algeria that may have become a victim of its own success. Demand for it skyrocketed recently after a number of posts by TikTok influencers. That, though, brought it to the attention of authorities who have banned it, saying that it's not up to scratch. Algerian regulators, though, say France is just closing ranks around a potential Nutella rival. Brian Quinn tells us more.
In a small corner store in working-class Marseille, you can still find it. But if you want a jar of El Morjan, it'll cost you.
30 euros a jar? You've got to be kidding. It's like 50 cents at home.
The sweet, creamy hazelnut spread has become so popular in France over recent weeks that its price has at least quadrupled. That sudden success may have been its undoing. Its import is now banned, the French Ministry of Agriculture citing Algerian livestock health and food safety standards.
Algeria does not meet the conditions for a third country to export products to the European Union containing dairy ingredients intended for human consumption.
Algeria's Consumer Protection Association says the ban is unjustified. It's accusing France of seeking to protect European nut spreads like Nutella from the Italian sweets giant Ferrero. Ferrero, for its part, denies any involvement in the ban. Across the Mediterranean, meanwhile, El Morjan's newfound celebrity has made it a source of national pride.
I traveled 20 kilometers to find this. It's gotten famous abroad. It's a product of our country.
The small family business that makes El Morjan in the Algerian city of Oran says the craze has driven its orders sky high around the world. But in France, where it started, shipments remain blocked at the border. An official investigation has been launched to determine how it has managed to be imported up to this point.
I should have taken advantage of being able to buy it when I saw it on the shelves a couple of months back. Too late now. That, though, unfortunately, is all the time we have for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us, though. Do so again. Take care.
This is betel nut. It's a fruit, and it's part of Taiwanese culture. I don't take any myself, but customers say it warms them and wakes them up.
When you chew the strongest ones, you can almost faint.
This small green fruit is nicknamed Taiwanese chewing gum. Although it's legal, it's also highly carcinogenic.
I've stopped. I'm scared of cancer, but they're not.
I don't care, as long as I'm not sick.
In Taiwan, hundreds of thousands of people consume betel nuts. Thousands more make a living of its production.
It doesn't cost much to grow betel nuts in Taiwan. It's very profitable.
We can make a lot of profit because the market is huge. It's why betel is known as green gold.
A profitable market that holds back the government from legislating. Watch Taiwan's betel addiction on France 24 and France24.com.